Are you gonna make it happen today? Or will you just settle for another delay? Come on, you gotta make it happen now. Come on, you gotta make it happen now.
All right, Chris. Well, I'm going to ask you to just quickly introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you work, and what sort of involvement you have when it comes to workplaces and the people who work in those spaces.
Sure, thanks, Greg. My name is Chris Drinovz. I'm an employment and labor lawyer. I've been practicing law since 2010, and I head up the employment and labor practice group at a law firm called Kane Shannon Weiler, or KSW Lawyers. We're located in Surrey, Langley, and Abbotsford, and I handle anything to do with the workplace, whether it's wrongful dismissal, employment contracts, WorkSafeBC, health and safety. That's generally the scope of what I practice in.
Okay, so you're very focused in on essentially workplace, the relationship between employers and employees, and of course any issues that arise from there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's a hot topic these days, especially given the changing environment in which we are in. I mean, clearly there are businesses who are struggling. There are employees who are wondering whether or not they should go back to work. And there are so many questions out there about what just happened, what is happening, and what's next. So let's tuck into a couple of those then. Chris, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about, let's sort of do maybe chronologically, like we went through this period of two months of nobody working, places closed, some people being required to pay rent when they couldn't, and then others wondering how they're going to get back to work. And then maybe transition a little bit into where we're at right now. So what have you seen in that sense?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Starting the middle of March, everything changed, seemingly in an instant. We have all of these government orders coming down about businesses must close, must shut down. Employers are faced with very difficult decisions about what to do because their cash flow has stopped. Unfortunately, the government rolled out a number of assistance programs that hopefully, many of your members were able to take advantage of in this interim situation. But recently on May 8th, 2020, the province of BC rolled out this 4-phase restart plan. And the idea of that is to kind of, restart the economy, but do so in a way that guards and protects, the significant progress that we made as a province, especially compared to other provinces and the rest of the world, to flatten the COVID-19 curve. So the idea is really to, reopen everything, but do it in a way that's careful, cautious, and measured. And so, May 14th, 2020, we entered phase 2 of this restart plan. And that contemplated the reopening of most businesses. And May 19th, 2020 was the personal service businesses were allowed to open. The previous order was rescinded. But the condition for the reopening was that every business must follow the enhanced health and safety protocols that were established by the government to protect workers and customers. So this obligation, it's not optional, it's law. And it was made law by an order of the Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, in an order called Workplace COVID-19 Safety Plans. So what I was planning to do today, Greg, was kind of go through the parameters of the COVID-19 safety plans, particularly with respect to your industry, and then also look at another hot topic, which is work refusals. And I'll go through kind of the process that's mandated there from WorkSafe and how to deal with work refusals. And then if there's any other questions from members, we can open it up and I can answer those.
Okay, yeah, and we have some of those ready. So sounds good. So let's kick it off. And I'm already intrigued that this is a law. It's an order. It's not optional. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, made this order on May 14th. And basically it directs all businesses to establish a plan to ensure the risk of transmission of COVID-19 at workplaces is minimized. And this is called a COVID-19 safety plan. And I'm sure many of your members have already put a lot of thought into reopening and how to do it safely, but they may not have formalized that in a written plan. And if they haven't, now is the time to do that. There is an order in place and it is required. So in addition to making the plan, Dr. Henry also ordered that employers must post a copy of the plan, both on the business website, if they have one, and at the workplace in a prominent location, so it can be reviewed by not only workers but also customers and the public. And the plan does not actually have to be submitted to WorkSafe, but the enforcement arm of WorkSafe, the prevention division, has prevention officers making rounds right now to make sure that businesses have prepared the plan and posted it appropriately. So remember, this is law, so not following this order can result in significant fines to your business under the Workers' Compensation Act. And you know, at this point, my hope is that WorkSafe and the prevention officers will be flexible, lenient, you know, collaborate with businesses to help them if there is a deficiency in their plan or their safety protocols. But if you're just completely ignoring all of this and you happen to get a visit and there's no plan and your workplace is not safe, there could be fines. So remember, you know, if that does happen, seek guidance. You know, you can appeal these orders. There are ways through it, but just be cautious. Take this very seriously. And the other thing to note, Greg, is this order does not have an expiry date. So, you know, the obligation to have these plans and to keep them current and posted is going to stay in place for the foreseeable future. So you may be wondering, you know, what do I have to put in this plan? You know, I have lots of ideas. I've already done a lot to make my workplace safe. I'm seeing customers already. Everybody's happy. But what I'd recommend you do is go to the WorkSafeBC website and check out the guidance that they've provided, because they've given a lot of detail, a lot of guidance specific to each industry. And my opinion is that as long as you can show WorkSafe that you followed that guidance, you're going to be okay. They're not going to be able to say that this is an unsafe workplace or that you should be liable to pay a fine. And the same goes with complaints from employees, which I'll get into shortly. So in essence, your plan has to demonstrate two things. One, that you have done a good faith assessment of the risks of COVID-19 transmission in your workplace, and two, that you've taken appropriate measures to reduce those risks. So there's kind of an assessment piece, and then there's an action piece where you actually implement measures to deal with the risks that you've identified. And so WorkSafe on its website has a 6-step guide for developing the safety plan, and that's accompanied with a planning tool, which kind of goes through each of the 6 steps and gives you a checklist, gives you diagrams, gives you things to consider when you're coming up with the plan. You can access this on the website. And, you know, I won't go through all 6 steps in detail, but I'll just mention the first 2 and kind of go through what those involve, because they really reflect the assessment and the implementation kind of theme. So in terms of the assessment, you want to look at 2 things. You want to look at, first, look at your people. You know, who are your employees or who are your workers? Who is at risk? Are some of them older? Are some of them, you know, immunocompromised? Some of them need to take transit because they don't have a vehicle, so they're at greater risk. You know, write down who you have and who's at the most risk, and then consider who do you need. You know, who do you need in the workplace, and who can you keep at home or, you know, have working in different shifts so they're not as exposed to everybody at the same time. And then once you've looked at your workforce, look at your workspace, look at the physical workspace, and do an assessment. You know, do a walkthrough and identify the places where there may be greater risk of transmission. Where is there close contact between workers and customers? What services are being touched continuously? You know, doorknobs, light switches. Where are your shared spaces, kitchens, break rooms, all that kind of stuff? And, you know, what are your processes? You know, where are workers being required to come into close contact with the customers, and what materials are being exchanged in these transactions? So do that assessment and write it all down, you know, and show WorkSafe that you've made a clear and thorough investigation of this. And then step 2, you use the guidelines to implement the measures that's going to keep your workplace safe. So I'm sure many of you have already put a lot of thought into this, especially if you've reopened on May 19th. But, you know, look again at the WorkSafe guidelines and implement a plan, an action plan. You know, for your workforce, can you stagger shifts? For the working conditions, you know, for the workplace, does it need to be reorganized? Do you need shields, barriers, protective equipment? You know, look at your processes for hand washing and cleaning. Do you have adequate supplies? All that kind of stuff. And Greg sent me the link for the industry specific protocols for the personal services industry. That is a great piece of guidance for your business. It deals with managing the workplace and clients. It deals with providing personal services safely, using tools and equipment safely, and then cleaning and disinfecting them properly, and all that kind of stuff. So I'd recommend again that if you haven't read through that, read through it and take what's applicable and apply it to your workplace. So those are the first two steps of the plan, and then steps 3 to 5 I won't go through in detail, but essentially you want to look at your measures and make sure they're written down and they comply with any existing policies you might have. Steps 4 and 5 is to communicate your plan and to monitor your plan. So I think communication is really, really important, Greg, because you want to be as open and transparent with your employees and your workers as possible, because a lot of them are scared right now. A lot of them are going to be very anxious about coming back. So the more you can do to show them that you've taken their health and safety into consideration, and the more transparent you can be about the plan that you've made, the better they're going to feel and the more confident they're going to be to come into work and to get your business started again. So communicate your safety plan, and you want a free flow of information from yourself to your workers, and monitor the plan. Get feedback from your workers. Do they think that this is working? Do they have a concern? Get feedback from your customers. Continually assess the situation, and make sure that you're constantly updating the plan as needed. So yeah, those are some tips on the plan, and there's a lot more detail there, but given the time constraints, I'm just going to leave it there on the plan, Greg.
Chris, can I just ask you a quick question about some of those things? And by the way, these are all fantastic guidelines. I suspect that many of our members have put these together, but there are certainly some parts here that I know that aren't visible. For example, communicating this out to the public. I haven't seen this on a lot of websites, and if I have, I've seen it sort of transmitted through maybe social media, but it hasn't really been a plan. It's maybe just been a little tip or a one-liner or something like that. So I guess what we're looking here for is consistency in messaging, right? We want consistency in messaging so that clients, even if they're going from one space to another, that there is consistency, and that they, there's one member could look to another to see what they're doing as well, right? Because otherwise it just causes like a bit of confusion in terms of what's really required.
Yes. Really good point. Really good point.
And I think the second part is that you've got, you're talking a little bit about feedback here as well. And I'm wondering, how important is that? Because it's an interesting point. Very often, when we own a company or we're an owner or we're a leader, we kind of make the communication one way. This is the way it's going to be. How important is that feedback?
I think it's crucial, especially when you have your employees interacting with the customer, right? And they're the ones that can give you the feedback they've received from whether the customer feels safe and whether the customer feels like you're doing everything you can to make the workplace safe. So I think right now is really the time to be open and to listen. You don't have to implement everything everybody says, and we'll get into that a little bit in work refusals, because sometimes people's opinions are not based in evidence.
Sure.
And like I said, there's a lot of anxious people right now. So if you did everything that everybody said, you wouldn't be able to operate. But that listening to that feedback, evaluating it, and then implementing the measures that make sense. Again, it keeps that trust and loyalty piece for your workers, which right now is really, really important, because you want them to stay happy. You want them to keep coming in and making you money.
Yeah, I mean, that's number one. And I suppose you could even perhaps keep like maybe a suggestion box, so to speak, where you collect these things, and then when one of these environmental health officers walks in, or someone from WorkSafeBC could say, hey, I've got these 4 or 5 things I'm not sure of. What do you recommend? And they might have more, like you say, evidence-based, a more evidence-based approach, or more factual data around the question, or could even go away and come back with an answer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they have the safety training. And if you can show them that you are being collaborative with your employees, they may be much more willing to excuse something that they've noticed, right, if they know that you're willing to change it and you're willing to be open about it with your workforce.
Yeah. if you're speeding without a seatbelt, it's not good. But if at least if you have one of the two, then
That's right. Exactly.
all right, sounds great. So I think those are great points, and thank you very much. And the tool is a great thing that people use. So let's transition over to the next part.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about work refusals now, and it's a hot topic because there's a lot of people that don't want to come into work, and a lot of those are employees that have been collecting the CERB benefit for the last 10 weeks and doing nothing, and they would much rather continue staying at home and collecting the CERB for the next few months
Sure.
instead of coming back to work. Now, in those cases, if the work refusal is not health and safety related, as the employer, it's your right to call your employees into work. So if somebody is refusing and they're not giving you a health and safety reason, you can take the position that you need to come in by this date, or you've abandoned your job. And so that's a case by case evaluation. You need to be careful that the employment standards COVID-19 leave doesn't apply, which applies to people that are taking care of a child because of school closures, or have actually been diagnosed or ordered to stay home. But if none of those scenarios apply and the person is just has a bad feeling about it or doesn't want to come in because they're too lazy, you can file an ROE saying that they've quit.
Interesting.
But I would recommend papering that well and giving them one last chance to come in.
Yeah, Chris, just to ask a couple of questions there. What's the? I mean, I understand sort of the reasons not to come in or to come in. Obviously, I suppose if there were no plan, according to what we were talking about earlier, if there were nothing out there visible, if there were no clear compliance to workplace safety, potentially that could be. Would that be grounds to not come back?
It would, and absolutely. And what I'll do, Greg, is I'll get into the test. So workers have a right to refuse unsafe work. That's a statutory right given by the Workers' Compensation Act and the regulations. And in essence, the test for refusing unsafe work is the worker has a reasonable belief that there's a risk of undue harm if they go into work to do the job or a specific task at the job. So the key words there are: one, reasonable belief, and two, undue risk of harm. So right now there is obviously some risk everywhere. You can't completely eliminate the risk 100%. What a work refusal needs to be based on is an undue or an excessive risk of harm for which there is a reasonable basis to justify. So I think, Greg, in a situation where the employer simply has no plan in place and things are just as they were before the shutdown started, that's probably a reasonable basis to think that there's too much risk, especially in the personal services industry. So I think the employee would be within their rights to refuse to come in that case. And I'll get into what the process actually is when you have a work refusal and you have taken measures to make a plan and make the workplace safe. The first thing you need to do, the first step in the process is for the worker to identify the actual safety concern. So I had a case where my client had gone to great measures to implement a WorkSafe plan. Most of the employees had come back. The measures were in place, but one particular worker simply refused to come in. Now, this worker's wife had an autoimmune disease, so he had every reason to be concerned. But he couldn't actually identify what is it about the workplace that's unsafe. We'd shared the plan with him. We'd been fully transparent. We'd said, this is exactly how it would look when you return. These are the safety measures we put in place. Here's how it complies with WorkSafe. It's now on the worker to identify, well, no, I don't think this piece of it is safe. The worker couldn't do that here. He just said, no, I'm not coming in. So a general concern about safety is not sufficient. The worker has to identify what is the unsafe working condition. There needs to be a plexiglass thing here. I need to be given a mask. If they don't do that, it probably doesn't trigger this process. So it's on the worker to start the process. Once the concern is identified, it moves to the next step, and that goes over to the employer to do an investigation. Listen to the concern, investigate your workplace, do an investigation, and then report back to the worker. If you agree with the worker, you've got to fix the condition. If you disagree, you tell the worker, we've done an investigation, here's the results, and it goes back to the worker to decide, Do they want to come back, or do they want to maintain the refusal? If they maintain the refusal, it goes to step 3. This is where the worker can now participate in a repeat investigation. So the worker can either come on site, or if they're not comfortable doing that, you can video them in, and they can even have a representative there to check it out for themselves. And again, transparency. Here's what we're doing. There's nothing to hide here. This is what we're doing. And then again, it's on the worker to decide if they feel safe or not. If they still maintain the refusal, Greg, it goes to the final step, and that's you got to bring WorkSafe in. Okay. And a prevention officer will actually come in and make a ruling on whether the workplace is safe or not.
Interesting.
So sometimes that's all you can do. When the worker is simply being unreasonable or uncooperative, you say, fine, we're going to bring WorkSafe in. That should be the last resort, though. The last thing you want is to be bringing WorkSafe in to do an audit of your workplace,
right? Because
who knows what they're going to find. They may find other things that are totally unrelated,
right?
And it just goes on your record, and it's not something you want to deal with. So, do everything you can to work with the employee to resolve their concerns, and sometimes that'll mean working out an agreement where they can stay off, either on layoff or on an unpaid leave until they feel safe again. It may mean making an accommodation to allow them to work from home, or allow them to come in when there's less people in. Sometimes you just simply can't make those accommodations. Like in my case, they needed that fellow in to manage his staff. He needed to be in there in person. And so ultimately they ended up negotiating a severance package with him because he simply wasn't prepared to come in. So, for the employees that you value, do everything you can to work it out before you kind of hand it over to WorkSafe. I will say an interesting statistic I found coming out of Toronto. There's been 200 work refusals filed by workers concerned about contracting COVID-19. None of them were upheld. So it is a high standard, and I think as long as you can show that you've followed WorkSafe, you're going to be okay.
So do you think, Chris, is there a lot of emotion behind these refusals? Are people just sort of viscerally scared to come back in? Is that what it's about?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a lot of times the basis for it. So if you can show that worker that what you've done, the measures you've taken to make sure that things are safe, and direct them to the resources you've used, and to say, this is what the professionals have told us to do. WorkSafe is responsible for health and safety, and we've done exactly what they've said. That should hopefully be enough to kind of calm the fear and bring some objectivity into the analysis.
Okay.
So I'll just close with one more comment on work refusals. So if you do have a work refusal and you need to, get back to business and fill that role, you can bring someone in to do that worker's job, or you can assign another worker to that worker's duties. But what you can't do is terminate that person because they've made a health and safety complaint or they've refused to come in until you've gone through this whole process. Right. So you can't retaliate against someone prematurely. That's called a prohibitive action. And there's a protection for workers who are discriminated against because they've made a health and safety complaint. So if you do that, you could face a prohibitive action complaint, and WCB can award damages against you, or they can order you to bring the worker back. So again, don't retaliate, be cautious, document everything, and just be careful with these things.
But Chris, is there a termination without cause opportunity there? I mean, I'm just sort of looking at some of the options, or once you get into this situation, does some other mechanism kick in to protect against that?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. So it's almost like a human rights issue,
right?
Where if you terminate, even if it's without cause, if the termination is tainted by a health and safety issue, so if there's a temporal connection between the person raising the complaint and the negative action, it does not matter if it's without cause. They may well still have a prohibitive action complaint. So if you are going to go the termination route, you should probably do it through a careful negotiation. Best if the employee suggests, like that's what happened in our case. The fellow just said, listen, I'm ready to go. I'll take 4 weeks pay. and we said, okay, you've initiated the discussion. We didn't take this action. You're suggesting it. Here's the package, sign the release, off you go. So just be very careful about it. And if you are going to terminate, make sure that the health and safety issue has nothing to do with it.
Got it. Perfect.
Yeah, so my final comment, Greg, is just on mental health. And, we've touched a bit on anxiety, and, many workers, especially in your industry, they're going to be dealing with people up close. They're going to be touching people. They're going to be performing services on people. And so the risk is higher for them. And so understandably, there's going to be some anxiety. Be cognizant of that. Make sure your workers know you support them. Direct them to the mental health resources that are available. WorkSafe has a virtual counseling service, which is free, and it's a registered psychologist. They're on call, ready to talk to people. Put that in your plan. Make it available to your workers. Tell them that you care about their mental health, and be flexible with them. If someone can't come in because they need a mental health day, be reasonable about it. Do what you can to care for your workers.
Yeah, I think it's great. We forget about this because we get so hung up in rent that is due and rebooking clients and dealing with masks, and there's so many sort of tactical moving parts that we forget about the human element. And people are dealing with all sorts of things: their own anxiety, their own fears. They've got kids at home that can't go to school. Maybe their spouse is perhaps got laid off. There's a lot of personal financial pressures.
Yes.
Worries about the future. Even maybe concerned about how their business is doing, not their business, but their place of work is doing, right? So
yes, yeah,
we
absolutely.
do need to be aware of that for sure.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
good advice.
Yeah, so that's kind of my summary that I had prepared. I'm happy to answer any questions that the members
We've
had.
got a few. Chris, I do have a quick question though, and we chatted about this just before we started, was how does this change in a situation where you don't have that classic employer-employee relationship? You've got somebody who's renting a chair or renting a room. How does all this apply?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And Greg and I were talking about kind of the hybrid relationship that sometimes exists when you have a chair rental situation, but you still have some control over that person. Maybe you set their schedule, maybe you deduct DI. Are they an employee or not? Are they a contractor? And maybe for tax purposes they're not, but for the employment standards purposes they are. You never really know because the test isn't a clear line. But what the order says is that every business must come up with this COVID-19 safety plan. So if you're responsible for a business and you're responsible for a workplace, you need to consider all of the risks that are resulting from that workplace. So if you're renting your chair to some stylists, you don't necessarily have to make a plan for those people, but you need to be sure, I think, that they have made their plan and that you've assessed it and that you're satisfied with it, because ultimately it's your space and you may still be responsible for any harm that occurs on the space.
So just for clarity, Chris, does that mean that if you are an individual chair renter, let's say, and you're working X number of days in a place where you rent a space, do you have to create your own plan, your own individual plan, if you are a, whatever it is, even a sole proprietorship and up?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. But I think if you consider yourself a business,
Yep.
And even if you're a sole proprietor, if you are self-employed and you're advertising yourself as a business, I think you need your own individual plan.
Yeah.
And what's the harm in doing it, right? Why not have each person have their own plan and collaborate together to make sure it jives with everybody, right? So I think you're on the side of caution here.
Yeah, true. And then, of course, you've got some common shared spaces too, which I suppose you have to collaborate on. And perhaps that's the job of the individual who's got the rental facility, let's say the landlord, so to speak. So that person could deal with, common spaces, reception, bathrooms, change areas, laundry, etc. Could they be responsible for that part of it? But individual operators are kind of responsible for their own space, like their own workstation, their own pin pad, their own whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a really, really good way to look at it. And again, be collaborative about it. But I think, if you're responsible for the entire space as kind of the landlord, so to speak, and you have control over things like the bathrooms and the shared spaces, that's your responsibility. The individual contractors, you're responsible for your immediate workstation and what's in front of you.
One more question, just I don't know, because we could go down we're going to do a whole thing on this, is that when we come to, let's say, mobile stylists who work, let's say, at a wedding or they go to people's homes, or they might even do a bit in their house and a bit out of their house. Same idea, same principles apply?
Yeah, I mean that's another good question, Greg. I think if you're kind of going from workstation to workstation, obviously you have less control over the particular places that you're going to.
Right.
But I think, for the time that you are in control of it, ensuring that the measures that have been put into place you're satisfied with before you provide the service. I think that's probably the most you can do in that situation. And it may well be that you don't go there if you don't feel that it's safe, or you don't feel you can provide a safe service there for your customer.
Right. And there are so many variables. I mean, make sure the flower girl doesn't play with your makeup brushes, or, I mean, it really does, because you sort of lose control of your space when you're not in your space, because
Exactly.
your stuff is around, or it's not always easy to kind of keep a close eye on it. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking of weddings in particular. Not that
Yes.
there'll be a lot, but still, it's sort of a
I had to
classic
postpone
example.
mine, Greg. We were supposed to get married in August, but now it's August 2021.
There you go. Yeah. Well, more time to prepare, right?
Exactly.
Let's do a couple of questions here. And some of those we may have already covered, but Christine asked, I rent chairs to 3 stylists and a room to an esthetician. They are not employees. Do WorkSafeBC rules apply to them or all of us? And I know we covered that, but maybe just quickly answer that.
Yeah, so that goes back to our last discussion. I think I think you do have a general responsibility for the space that you're renting, and I think that would extend to ensure that the people that you're renting to, so these 3 stylists, have plans for themselves and are, make sure you're satisfied with the way that they're handling customers.
Yeah.
So again, I think I would suggest working collaboratively with all 4 of those people. To make sure that their plans are in place, and to make sure that they're aware of your plan, to make sure that the shared spaces are safe, and any equipment or tools that you're providing are safe as well.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Another one that's a little bit different, but still it's a question. Can we refuse services to a client? What if we are worried that they may be a carrier of the virus? I guess what we're asking is, how can we prevent any danger from coming into the workspace?
Right. And that's a very good question. I think that's exactly the kind of thing you want to consider when you're doing that risk assessment,
Right.
and when you're coming up with your plan. You want to make a policy of, how do we assess customers coming in, and how do we deal with any issues that come up if we see a risk presenting in the store or in the shop. And I think if it's clear that somebody has flu-like symptoms, absolutely they should not be allowed
Right.
in your shop. You've got a duty to make sure the workplace is safe, and if you're letting somebody in that potentially could have symptoms or the virus, you're exposing everybody there, including the customers and your workers, to that risk, and that could be a serious breach of your health and safety obligations to provide a safe workplace. So make sure you consider questions like that, because that can, there's a flip side to that coin, where you don't want to be held to be turning somebody away when there was really no signs or no risk, and that could result in even a human rights complaint or something, right? For refusing service to somebody with a disability or somebody that's got a disease. So you need to be careful, but I think that the point should be, if you see somebody exhibiting clear symptoms, if somebody's coughing or exhibiting other flu-like symptoms, definitely you're within your rights to refuse service to that customer.
We have a little form that we came up with. It's sort of like a little checklist that helps everybody follow a procedure through each appointment.
Right.
And it's very simple stuff, but it's just something like, the date, the name, or you can anonymize the name, and then who performed the services, but also did they, check the box. Did you have them assessed using the assessment tool? Did you clean the station? Did you? And then what time did they leave? And any concerns or any notes or any need for follow-up. Is a tool like that helpful in an instance like this, where we're maybe accepting an individual, we're not 100% sure that they're safe, but at least we're keeping track of, because you mentioned you used the word papering before.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good idea. The more, and it's a little bit onerous, because normally you're not doing any of this, but keeping logs of everything and going through those checklists and assessments, Greg, could be your saving grace if there's a complaint or if there's an issue.
That's right.
So for those cases where there's no obvious symptoms, but you might have a concern, but you don't want to turn away the customer because you want as much business as you can get right now, as long as it's safe. Go through that assessment, make sure you've logged it all and papered it all, and keep that all in one place, and keep it well organized just in case you get audited.
And protect privacy too, right?
Exactly. Yes, of course.
Last question. Nicola and Fran asked, how long can employees choose to not come back to work for me? Is there a time limit before we can terminate their employment with us? Now, I know we talked about that originally, but is there sort of a general time, or is that purely subjective?
Sure, yeah. So the first thing you want to look at is, do you have a written employment contract with the employee? Sometimes it allows for periods of layoff. Most employment contracts don't, and so we're really in kind of uncharted territories. But really, an employee, if you have work for them and they don't have any legitimate health and safety concerns like we talked about, they need to come into work. You have the right to require them to come into work, and if you're calling them from a temporary layoff and you say, I've made the schedule and you're in on Tuesday, I'll see you then, they've got to come in. They have to come in, And so if they say no, like I said before, you're within your rights to say you've abandoned your work. What I've done for my clients in those situations is, talk to the person. What are their concerns? Make sure it's not health and safety related, and then say, listen, you can take the week off, but we're going to have you in next Wednesday. I'm going to send you a formal letter telling you that you need to be in, and if you don't come in, we're going to consider this to be abandonment of employment. Right. And in legal terms, that has the same effect as a resignation or quitting. And you tell that employee that we'll issue a record of employment. It'll say quit, and you're not really entitled to collect the CERB anymore because you're not out of work. And then it's on the employee. If they want to continue defrauding the government, that's kind of on them.
Yeah, you can wash your hands of that.
Exactly.
And of course, that's always the question, right? At what point, we have had that question is, will I be disallowed the CERB if I'm supposed to go back to work but don't want to? So clearly there's a mechanism between work and employee there that comes into play, right?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
Well, Chris, this has been utterly illuminating and fascinating. I've learned so much. I feel like we should have talked a couple of weeks ago, but no time like the present to get everyone in ship shape. And anything else you want to add or just close up with?
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me, Greg. It's been a pleasure. I really commend all businesses in your association for getting through these hard times. Been probably hit hardest out of most businesses. So good on you for sticking through it, and for those that are getting back to business, all the best. If you have any more questions about anything I've said, I'm happy to talk to anyone. I think maybe Greg will send along my contact information, and just feel free to get in touch with me.
Thank you so much. I want to wish you all the best as well, and look forward to your wedding next year.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Are you gonna make it happen today? Or will you just settle for another delay? Come on, you gotta make it happen now. Come on, you gotta make it happen now. Said, are you gonna wait and sit on your hands? Or will you go and start making out a list of demands? Cause you can make it happen, so choose if it's your passion to move. But start attacking, don't lose out on the action. Are you gonna make it happen today?